He was not looking for answers that night. He was only trying to survive his own thoughts. The room was quiet, but his mind was loud. Thoughts moved fast, one after another. Worries about the future, memories from the past, questions with no clear answers. He sat there, doing nothing special. No meditation, no technique, no plan. Just a tired man in a silent room. Then something strange happened. In the middle of his racing thoughts, he noticed his breath, not because he tried to, not because someone told him to. It simply entered his awareness. Air moved in, air moved out, and for a brief moment, his thoughts slowed down. What caught his attention was not the breath itself, but the feeling that someone was watching it. He suddenly realized he was not thinking about breathing, he was observing it. This small realization felt bigger than it should have, as if a hidden door inside his mind had quietly opened. For a few seconds, everything felt different. The room felt larger, time felt slower. The noise inside his head faded into the background. It was not peaceful in a dramatic way. It was calm in a subtle way, like standing still in the middle of a storm and noticing the storm does not touch you. Then his thoughts returned, but something had changed. He could not explain it, yet the feeling stayed. The next morning, he remembered that moment clearly. It felt more real than a dream, and more important than most thoughts he had every day. As he went through his routine, he noticed small things. He reacted slower to stress. He listened more when people spoke. Problems that usually controlled his mood felt weaker. This confused him. Nothing in his life had changed on the outside, but something inside him had shifted. He began asking questions. Was it just a coincidence? Was it a trick of the mind? Or did observing the breath actually change something deeper? That night, he tried to repeat the experience, but the moment he tried, it disappeared. The breath was still there, but the quiet watcher was gone. This made him even more curious. Why did awareness appear when he was not looking for it, and disappear when he tried to control it? He started noticing how often his life was lived on autopilot, breathing without knowing, thinking without choosing, reacting without awareness. And yet, in that one accidental moment, simply noticing, the breath had created space. Space between thought and reaction. Space between emotion and identity. A strange idea began to form in his mind. What if the breath was not important? What if the observer was? Science talked about particles changing behavior when observed. Philosophy spoke about the witness behind experience. Ancient teachings whispered about awareness as the true self. But this was not theory for him anymore. It was experience. He realized something unsettling and exciting at the same time. If observing the breath could change how he felt, what else could observation change? And more importantly, was reality itself responding to awareness? That question followed him into the darkness, quiet, powerful, and impossible to ignore. And somewhere inside that question, a deeper journey had already begun. He could not forget the feeling, not the calm, but the strange distance it created between him and his thoughts. It was as if something inside him had stepped back, quiet, still, watching. Over the next few days, he began to notice this silent presence more often, not all the time, only in small moments. While washing his hands, while waiting in traffic, while listening to someone speak, there were brief pauses where thoughts softened, and behind them, something watched. At first, he thought this watcher was just another thought, a clever idea his mind created, but the more he observed, the clearer it became. Thoughts were noisy. The watcher was silent. Thoughts came and went. The watcher stayed when anger appeared. The watcher noticed it when fear rose. The watcher noticed that too, but it did not react. It did not judge. This confused him. If the watcher was not the mind, then what was it? Science had words for this. Awareness, attention, metacognition. Philosophy had all the words. The witness, the observer, the self behind the self. But names did not matter. Experience did. He noticed something important. The moment he became aware of a thought, the thought lost some of its power. Worry felt weaker when watched. Fear felt smaller when seen. Even pain changed when noticed without resistance. It was as if attention itself reshaped experience. He started gently observing his breath again, not to force the experience, not to repeat the moment, but to invite the watcher back. Sometimes it appeared, sometimes it did not. When it did, time felt different. Moments stretched, silence grew between breaths. He began to see how rarely he truly observed his life. Most of the time, he was lost inside thoughts about the past or future, living stories instead of moments. And yet, the breath was always here, quiet, steady, waiting. The watcher seemed to live in the present. It did not care about yesterday. It did not worry about tomorrow. It only noticed what was. This led him to a strange realization. Maybe peace was not something to achieve. Maybe it appeared naturally when observation replaced resistance. He wondered how many choices in his life were made unconsciously, how many reactions happened without awareness, how many patterns repeated simply because no one was watching them. If awareness could interrupt a thought, could it interrupt a habit, a fear, a belief? The idea felt both hopeful and unsettling, because if awareness changed experience, then ignorance shaped suffering, and that meant most people, including him, were living inside realities they never consciously chose. One evening, while observing his breath again, a quiet understanding surfaced. The watcher was not trying to fix anything. It was not improving him. It was not changing the world directly. It was simply revealing what was already happening, and somehow, that was enough to begin change. He sensed that this silent observer was the key, not the breath, not the technique. The breath was only the doorway, and beyond that doorway, something vast and unexplored was waiting. Something that did not think, did not speak, but saw everything. And he knew, if he continued down this path, nothing about how he understood himself or reality would remain the same. As his inner observations deepened, he felt a strong need to understand what was happening, not just through feeling, but through reason. He began reading, not searching for beliefs, but for explanations. That is when science quietly entered the story. He discovered something strange. In the world of physics, observation was not passive. Particles behaved one way when unobserved, and another way when measured. Electrons shifted, probabilities collapsed, outcomes changed. Scientists called it the observer effect. But no one fully explained why it happened. This unsettled him, because what he experienced inside felt strangely similar when his thoughts were unobserved. They ran wild. They controlled emotion and action. But when observed, they changed shape. Sometimes they disappeared completely. Could the same principle be at work, inside and outside? He learned that the brain itself changes when attention is applied. Neural pathways strengthen or weaken, not by force, but by awareness. The brain, like reality, responded to focus. This made the breath feel less ordinary. Breathing was constant, reliable, always present. It was the perfect point of observation. Unlike thoughts, the breath did not argue. It did not tell stories. It simply moved. Each time he observed it, he noticed something subtle. His sense of being a separate thinker weakened. There was breathing, there was awareness, but the boundary between them blurred. Science described this as attention-shaping perception. Philosophy described it as the observer dissolving into experience. Different languages, pointing to the same mystery. He began to see that reality was not something fixed, it was something experienced, and experience depended on observation. Even memory changed under attention. The past softened when watched without judgment. The future lost its grip when awareness stayed present. This led to a dangerous thought. If experience shapes reality, and observation shapes experience, then observation indirectly shapes reality, not by magic, not by wish, but by perception, choice, and response. He realized something important. Most people never truly observe. They react, they repeat, they assume. The reality feels solid, but it is built on unconscious attention. The breath offered another way. Each breath was neutral. It carried no story, no identity. Watching it trained the mind to watch everything else. He felt as if science had quietly confirmed his experience. Not loudly, not clearly, but enough to remove doubt. This was not imagination. This was interaction. The observer was not outside reality. The observer was part of the system. That realization sent a chill through him. Because if awareness was part of the system, then changing awareness changed the system. And that meant the smallest act, simply watching the breath, might have consequences far beyond calm. He understood now. This journey was no longer personal. It touched the nature of reality itself. And somewhere between science, breath, and awareness, a simple question grew louder. What would happen if observation became intentional, careful, and sustained? What would happen if he truly watched? Understanding alone was no longer enough. If observation could change experience, then it could be tested. he decided to try something simple. Not endless breathing, not hours of silence, just a number, 111 breaths, no control, no rhythm, no effort. To calm the mind, only watching. The first few breaths felt ordinary. Air moved in, air moved out. His mind stayed busy. Thoughts questioned the experiment. Doubt whispered that nothing would happen. He noticed the thoughts, then returned to the breath. Around the 20th breath, impatience appeared. His body shifted. His mind searched for results. He observed that, too, by the 40th breath, something subtle changed. Thoughts became slower. Gaps appeared between them. The breath no longer felt like an object. It felt like a rhythm, a quiet anchor in the present moment. At the halfway point, he lost track of time, not because he was forcing focus, but because attention had settled on its own. There was breathing, and there was awareness of breathing. Nothing else felt urgent. Around the 70th breath, a strange feeling arose, a lightness in his body, as if tension he never noticed was dissolving. He felt less like someone doing something, and more like something simply happening. The watcher felt clearer now, not distant, not effortful, just present. By the 90th breath, his sense of identity softened. Thoughts still appeared, but they no longer pulled him away. They floated, then faded. He was surprised, not by peace, but by how natural it felt. Nothing had been achieved, nothing added. Something had only been removed. As he approached the final breaths, he realized he was not waiting for the experiment to end. There was no goal left to reach on the 111th breath. There was no dramatic moment, no flash, no vision, just clarity. The room felt the same, but his relationship to it had changed. He was aware, without effort, when he finally stood up. The world felt slightly unfamiliar, not unreal, just less heavy. He did not feel transformed, but he felt aligned, as if something inside him had returned to its natural position. This raised a powerful question. If 111 observed breaths could shift awareness this deeply, what happens when this state follows him into life, into conversations, into decisions, into moments of stress? He sensed that this experiment was only the beginning. The breath had done its job. Now reality would respond. The changes did not arrive loudly. They did not announce themselves. They slipped in quietly, almost unnoticed. The next day felt ordinary at first. Same streets, same sounds, same routine, but something underneath had shifted. He noticed it in small moments, a pause before reacting, a calm where stress usually appeared when someone spoke sharply to him. The familiar tension rose, then softened, as if the watcher stepped in between impulse and response. He listened instead of defending, and the conversation changed direction. This surprised him. At work, decisions felt clearer. He spent less time trapped in overthinking, more time simply acting. Problems still existed, but they no longer felt personal. It was as if life was happening through him, not to him. He began noticing coincidences, small ones, but frequent. Thinking of someone just before they called, finding solutions after letting go of effort, doors opening where he expected resistance. He did not rush to explain these moments. He simply noticed them, and noticing seemed to invite more. The breath followed him everywhere now, not as a focus, but as a reminder. Whenever tension appeared, a single observed breath created space, space between feeling and reaction, space where choice lived. He realized something important. He was no longer trying to control reality. He was responding to it with awareness, and reality seemed to respond back. This raised an unsettling thought. How much of life had been shaped by unconscious attention? How many struggles were reinforced simply by constant reaction? He saw how often people around him were lost in side thought, arguing with moments that had already passed, fearing futures that had not arrived. He recognized that same pattern in his old self. Now, awareness interrupted it. Again and again, life felt lighter, not because it was easier, but because he was no longer carrying it blindly. The watcher did not remove pain, but it prevented suffering from multiplying. He understood now. The power was never in forcing positive thoughts or chasing outcomes. It was in seeing clearly, seeing emotions as they arose, seeing thoughts as temporary, seeing reality without the filter of constant reaction. This clarity changed how he moved through the world. People sensed it. Conversations softened. Conflicts dissolved faster, not because he tried to change others, but because awareness changed the space between them. he began to suspect something profound. Reality mirrors the quality of attention given to it, and when attention is calm, reality reflects calm. The breath was no longer just breath, it was a doorway he could return to at any moment. And with every return, life felt less like a struggle, and more like a conversation, one that listened. Back, he did not claim certainty, he did not call it truth. What he had discovered felt quieter than belief, and stronger than doubt. The breath had not given him answers, it had taken something away. Noise, assumptions, the need to constantly control. What remained was awareness. He began to see his life differently, not as a series of problems to solve, but as moments to notice. Each moment carried a choice, to react unconsciously, or to observe. He saw how often suffering was created after the fact, not by events themselves, but by resistance to them. The watcher did not protect him from pain, but it stopped pain from becoming identity. This changed everything. He understood now. The breath was never special. It was simply always available. A bridge between the body and awareness. Between the visible and the invisible. Science might describe this as attention shaping perception. Philosophy might call it the witness of experience, but words no longer mattered much. What mattered was this: when awareness was present, life unfolded differently. He no longer felt separate from what he observed. There was thinking, there was feeling, there was breathing, but no solid center holding it all tightly together. This was not loss, it was freedom. Freedom from constant inner struggle, freedom from automatic reaction. He realized something both simple and unsettling. If awareness shapes experience, and experience shapes reality, then every moment of attention is a creative act. Not dramatic, not supernatural, but subtle, continuous. He did not try to convince anyone. He did not try to teach. He simply lived with awareness, one breath at a time, and yet, the question remained, quiet, persistent. If observing the breath can change the observer, and the observer changes how reality is experienced, then what might change if someone else tried it too? Not to believe, not to follow, but simply to notice. 111 breaths, observed without effort. No promises, no expectations, just awareness, meeting the present moment. The story does not end here, it pauses, waiting for the next breath to be noticed.